It was December 31st, 1944, the final night of a long, merciless year. Across Europe, towns prepared for the stroke of midnight, hoping that maybe the next year would bring peace. But far above the snow-covered roofs of Germany, there was no celebration, only the steady drone of engines and the dull orange flashes of flak bursting through the dark. 37 B-17 flying fortresses carved a slow, stubborn path through the frozen night. Their target that day, oil refineries on the outskirts of Hamburg, the lifeblood of Germany's war machine. Among them was the Little Skipper, a weathered bomber under the command of Lieutenant Glenn Rojohn of Pennsylvania. Inside the cramped fuselage, his crew moved with quiet precision, men barely in their 20s, each knowing that a single burst of flak could end their story. The radio operator muttered a quick prayer. The waist gunner kissed a crumpled photograph of his fiancée. Even the seasoned engineer crossed himself before checking the fuel gauges one last time. Small rituals in a sky that respected no one. Rojohn's gloved hands gripped the controls, eyes scanning the black horizon. His oxygen mask hissed with every breath. Around them, the air was alive, glowing tracers, black clouds of exploding shells, fragments of steel hammering against the bomber's belly. Each explosion briefly lit the faces of men who had stopped blinking long ago. For over an hour, they flew through that storm, blind, deafened, and shaking from the concussions that rocked their plane. The formations scattered, then reformed, only to scatter again. Still, they pressed on, guided not by sight, but by duty, and the faint red glow of their comrades' taillights. And when the bombing run was finally done, and they turned toward home over the dark waters of the North Sea, every man dared to believe they might live to see the new year. But in that endless sky, fate had other plans. Before this mission was over, 2 bombers would become one. The city of Hamburg stretched out below them, a dim web of shadows and orange glows beneath a blanket of smoke. From this height, it looked almost still. But every man aboard the Little Skipper knew the truth. The moment those bomb bay doors opened, the city would come alive with fury. "Bomb doors open," came the calm voice of the bombardier. The hydraulic whine echoed through the fuselage, and a cold draft swept in. Below, anti-aircraft batteries roared to life. Within seconds, the sky erupted, black explosions blooming all around them like monstrous flowers. Each blast sent the B-17 lurching, the metal skin trembling under invisible fists. Rojohn's voice came steady over the intercom. "Hold formation, stay tight. We're almost through." No shouting, no panic. Just the kind of control that steadied hearts when everything else seemed to be coming apart. The bombardier's voice cracked through the static. "Target in sight! Ready! Bombs away!" A dull thump, then the bomber jolted upward, suddenly lighter. The men knew their job wasn't done. The hardest part was always getting out alive. Below them, the city vanished under a rolling cloud of flame. Flak guns followed the departing fortresses, filling the night with black smoke and burning metal. Fragments ripped past the wings. One round exploded close enough to blow out a panel of glass in the nose. The co-pilot, Leek, ducked as shards rained over his lap. "Easy, Bill," Rojohn muttered, adjusting the trim. "She's still flying." They all were, for now. As the Little Skipper climbed through the chaos, the air grew thinner, colder, quieter. Yet no one relaxed. Somewhere in the silence between explosions, every man on board felt it. That invisible pressure before fate decides to make its move. The bombing run was over. The order to turn home rippled through the formation, and a quiet sigh of relief swept through every crew. Below them, Hamburg burned, a trembling sea of fire fading beneath thick smoke. The bombers leveled out, engines humming in unison as they pushed toward the North Sea. For a brief moment, it felt like the worst had passed. The men loosened their oxygen masks, flexed stiff fingers, and exchanged tired glances. The flak was behind them now, just open sky ahead. Then, out of that same sky, death returned. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high." The warning came from a gunner's strained voice, barely finishing before the first streaks of tracer fire ripped past. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf 110 dropped from the clouds, fast, agile, relentless. They came in waves, slicing through the bomber stream like wolves through wounded prey. Machine guns clattered from every direction. The little skipper shuddered under the stress of combat, the sound of bullets hammering metal like a drumline. "Tail gunner, fire, fire!" someone shouted. The intercom crackled with half-broken voices, curses, calls for help, static, prayers. A B-17 to their left caught a burst across the wing. It rolled, trailing smoke, and disappeared below. Another vanished in a flash of orange light. Through the chaos, Rojohn's voice cut clean and calm. "Tighten up, keep formation, don't let them break us apart." He flew steady, eyes fixed ahead, even as tracers zipped past his canopy. The little skipper held the line, filling the gap where others had fallen. When the last Me-109s finally broke away, the sky was eerily quiet again. And Rojohn realized how few of them were left. The formation had become a skeleton of what it was an hour ago, and he was now leading what remained. The formation was in pieces. Smoke trailed across the sky like ribbons from dying engines, and burning fragments drifted down toward the sea. Ahead of the little skipper, the lead bomber, Lucky Lassie, took a direct hit to the wing. Flames swallowed its left engine as it lurched sideways, losing altitude fast. Rojohn's instincts took over. He pushed the throttles forward, engines roaring as the little skipper surged ahead to fill the hole in the line. An open gap meant death. Every surviving bomber depended on the protection of the others. He didn't think, he just moved. "Come on, girl, hold together," he muttered, gripping the yoke tight. The plane vibrated violently as they climbed into the slot, leveling into the slipstream left by Lucky Lassie. Then, a sudden jolt, a sound like thunder tearing through metal. The aircraft lurched so violently that the co-pilot, Lieutenant William Leek, slammed against his harness. Loose equipment crashed to the floor. Oxygen masks swung wildly in the air. "What the hell was that?" Rojohn shouted, eyes darting to the gauges. The altimeter spun, the wings groaned under strain. The waist gunner's voice came through the intercom, panicked and breathless. "Something hit us. I think we're stuck on something." Rojohn fought the controls, forcing the nose up, trying to steady her. But the bomber felt heavy now, sluggish, unresponsive. For a moment, no one spoke. The sky was eerily still, and none of them yet knew that another B-17 was welded beneath their own. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The instruments flickered, the engines groaned, and the little skipper began to sink nose first through the clouds. Rojohn and Leek fought the controls, straining against the yokes just to keep the plane level. Something enormous was weighing them down. "Flaps jammed!" Leek shouted. Rojohn shook his head, eyes scanning the gauges. "No, something's on us." The radio operator crawled forward from the waist section, his face pale. "Lieutenant, you're not going to believe this." Rojohn twisted in his seat and looked through the side window. Below them, impossibly close, another B-17 clung to their belly. Its nose crumpled deep into their fuselage. The two bombers were locked together mid-air, fused by twisted metal and shattered frames. the lower plane's dorsal turret was wedged tight into the little skipper's belly, pinning them together. For a long, stunned moment, no one spoke. Only the low moan of wind filled the cabin, that strange, ghostly hum of two wounded giants still trying to fly. "Dear God," Leek whispered, "it's 9 lives." Down below, the other plane's propellers still spun unevenly. 3 engines alive, 1 trailing fire. Together, the 2 aircraft moved as one, tail to tail, wobbling through the sky in a grotesque dance. Rojohn steadied his voice. "Cut number 3, he ordered. "Try to balance the thrust." The co-pilot obeyed, but the controls barely responded, sluggish, half dead. Then came the shrill whine of the fire alarm. Smoke seeped through the floorboards, curling up between their boots. Leek met Rojohn's eyes, no panic, just grim understanding. They both knew it then, without a word spoken. They weren't going home. Rojohn steadied his trembling hands on the controls. The yoke fought back, sluggish and heavy. Smoke filled the cockpit in lazy gray ribbons, and the acrid smell of burning oil crept into every breath. Somewhere below, the engines of 9 lives still rumbled, uneven, angry, and alive. Leek leaned over the fire panel, slapping at the switches. "Engine 2's burning bad. If it spreads to the wing tank, we're done." Rojohn gave a curt nod. "Cut her off. Feather the prop. We can't risk a blowout." They both knew their situation was hopeless. The collision had torn away control lines and crippled the hydraulics. The little skipper was barely flying, held aloft by luck and stubbornness. "England's out of reach," Leek said quietly. "We'd never make the channel." Rojohn didn't answer at first. He just stared out the windshield at the distant glow of Germany's coastline ahead. "If we ditch in the sea, nobody survives," he said finally. "But if we head inland, maybe the boys can jump." It wasn't a plan to save themselves. It was a plan to save everyone else. Leek swallowed hard, eyes glancing at the smoke curling around their boots. "You think she'll hold together that long?" Rojohn exhaled slowly. "Long enough." The intercom crackled, voices from the crew waiting for orders. Rojohn pressed the mic. "All stations, listen up. Prepare to bail when we're over land. I'll keep her steady as long as I can." He looked at Leek. No words, just a shared nod, the kind that passes between men who've already accepted what's coming. No bravado, no speeches, just duty, quiet, deliberate, and human. The sky was strangely calm now, as if even the wind was holding its breath. 2 bombers, fused together in midair, drifted eastward over the North Sea, their engines coughing smoke. Below, the waves shimmered faintly under a gray winter sun. Above, no fighters, no flak, just silence and disbelief. Rojohn held the yoke steady, feeling every vibration of the broken metal beneath him. Each minute felt borrowed. The control surfaces responded sluggishly, as if the 2 planes were arguing about which direction to die in. "Coming up on the coast," Leek murmured, wiping sweat and soot from his face. "German territory." Rojohn gave a humorless smile. Funny place to go looking for mercy. On the ground, German anti-aircraft batteries spotted the strange sight. At first, gunners scrambled for their triggers, but the officers waved them down. Through binoculars, they watched in silence as the 2 fortresses limped overhead, locked together in flight like wounded birds refusing to fall. One captain later wrote in his logbook, "2 fortresses collided in formation in the northeast. They flew hooked together for 20 miles. I ceased fire. The crash could be awaited. Inside the little skipper, the heat grew unbearable. Flames licked up from below the floorboards. One by one, Rojohn ordered the crew to jump. Parachutes bloomed like white petals in the smoky air. That left 2. Go, Bill, Rojohn said, his voice firm but weary. That's an order. Leek tightened his harness, shaking his head. Not a chance. You're not dying alone. For a long moment, they said nothing. Just the sound of wind, fire, and two hearts beating faster than the engines. Together, they turned the dying aircraft toward the land. Not as pilots, but as brothers. From high above, the last 6 parachutes drifted gently toward the distant fields of northern Germany. Small white dots against an endless gray sky. Below them, the 2 bombers descended together, locked in their grim embrace. Fire trailed from one wing, black smoke curling upward like a signal to heaven. Inside the cockpit, Rojohn and Leek fought gravity with everything they had left. The controls were stiff as stone. Every joint in the airframe groaned. Alarms shrieked, lights flickered, and still the earth kept rising. Pull, Bill, Rojohn shouted, his voice raw. Both men leaned forward, then back, bracing their boots against the console, hauling on the yokes with all their strength. The metal screamed under pressure. The ground filled the windshield now, a frozen landscape of fields, fences, and distant farmhouses rushing toward them. Seconds stretched like hours. Now! Rojohn yelled. With a final desperate pull, the conjoined bombers lifted, just enough. The nose rose slightly, the horizon tipped, and for one fleeting heartbeat, it looked like they might clear the field. Then came the impact, a thunderclap of metal meeting Earth. The lower plane, 9 lives, exploded on contact, a burst of fire and shattered wings. The little skipper shot forward, skidding across the field, its fuselage tearing apart as debris scattered in every direction. Wooden sheds splintered. A wing sheared off and spun into a plume of dirt. For a long moment, the world became dust, fire, and silence. Then slowly, the wind returned. Smoke drifted across the wreckage. Inside the broken nose section, 2 figures hung motionless in their seats, bruised, bloodied, but breathing. They had survived the impossible, silence. For a long moment, that was all there was. No engines, no gunfire, only the faint hiss of cooling metal and the whisper of wind across the shattered field. Inside the twisted cockpit of the little skipper, Lieutenant Glenn Rojohn blinked through smoke and dust. The world tilted sideways. A trickle of blood ran from his temple, but he was alive. Beside him, Leek stirred, coughing hard, his face blackened with soot. Bill, you with me? Rojohn rasped. Leek gave a shaky thumbs up. Still here, somehow. They were still strapped in their seats, surrounded by wreckage that no longer looked like an airplane. The glass nose was shattered, the control panel torn apart. And daylight poured through holes where the floor used to be. Together, they unbuckled and crawled out through a jagged tear in the fuselage. The cold air hit them like a slap. All around, fragments of both bombers lay scattered. Engines, wings, twisted sheets of aluminum, all fused into one final resting place. In the distance, voices shouted in German. A group of soldiers approached cautiously, weapons half raised. But as they drew closer, even they hesitated, staring in disbelief at what lay before them. One officer finally broke the silence, his voice almost reverent. Zwei Flugzeuge, zusammen? 2 planes, together? Rojohn and Leek stood motionless, exhausted, unarmed, and alive. For that brief, fragile moment, even war itself seemed to pause in awe of survival. In the hours that followed, German soldiers gathered what remained of the 2 bombers. 10 men had survived, 6 from the little skipper, and 4 from 9 lives. They were taken as prisoners, fed, and questioned, but even their captors could not hide their astonishment. Word of the Piggyback planes spread quickly, whispered among soldiers who had seen everything war could offer. except this. Lieutenant Glenn Rojohn and William Leek spent the final months of the war in separate prison camps. They survived hunger, exhaustion, and the long uncertainty of captivity. When peace finally came, they returned home quietly, each carrying the memory of that flight like a scar that could not be seen. Rojohn was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, but he refused to call himself a hero. "Leek saved my life," he would tell anyone who asked. He stayed when he didn't have to. For decades, the two men lost touch. Life moved on, as it always does. Then, in 1986, Rojohn tracked down his old co-pilot. A year later, in Long Beach, California, the surviving members of the 100th Bomb Group gathered once more. When Rojohn and Leek met, there were no speeches, no tears, just a handshake that lasted longer than words could. In the chaos of war, they had proven something rare. That courage isn't about killing or winning, but about staying with someone when you could have saved yourself. And somewhere in memory, two bombers remain, locked together forever, like dragonflies frozen in history.